We need your help to create a new vision for downtown Fort Collins over the next 20 years. We all love downtown. It's incredibly vibrant, but it wasn't always that way. Over 25 years ago, when the original downtown plan was created, downtown wasn't looking so good. And through the concerted efforts of folks like yourself, that made downtown so successful. We know after interviewing hundreds of people, probably about 2,000 responses already over the last 2 months, that downtown is not without challenges. So we'd like you to think bold and think big today. Got some exercises, some interactive work we'll be doing with you tonight to ensure downtown success as we create this new vision. The downtown plan boundaries are a little bit different this time around. We're actually subtracting some areas that are residential on east into the west of the downtown, known as the Old Town neighborhoods. If you look on this map, you'll see a dashed yellow line. That's the old plan boundary. And we're also including some commercial and employment areas that weren't there before. So, for example, the Rocky Mountain Innisphere to the north, the commercial district just north of CSU to the far south. And it actually ranges all the way to the west, here at the Lincoln Center, and to the east to the new development at Woodward. Most of us think about downtown as being the historic core, but it's actually much more than that. In addition to that historic district, we have about 10 other areas that have a very distinct character. In fact, some of you had the opportunity over the last 2 days, or last Thursday, Friday rather, to tour around with the city staff and look at these defining characteristics of these different districts and get a very good sense of both the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Our timeline for the project has us here right in the middle of the visioning. This is that green bar. And over the next couple of months, we're going to be pushing you to help define that vision and then go into a phase during the fall where we're going to be making some hard choices and we're looking very seriously at the costs and the trade-offs of the various options that are available. And then in about 9 to 10 months, we're going to have actually a draft plan in physical form for you to review. Visioning is a little bit different than what we're accustomed to. Oftentimes we think of our past experiences and history to inform what's going to happen in the future, but that's not always the case. So we need to push ourselves and again think a little bit further out, maybe some things that aren't anticipated. And I like to use this example of the movie Back to the Future. What's coincidental about it is it was created in 1989, just like our downtown plan. And it projected out to the year 2015. How about that? So, you look at this image and our hero, Michael J. Fox, Marty McFly, and he's standing around with some people very wildly dressed. I don't know if any of us dress like that, but you also see a flying police car. Well, flying cars and hovering skateboards didn't happen, right? But there are a lot of things that were in that movie, different elements, that did come true. I mean, think about it, that you can pull out your cell phone and Skype somebody half the way around the world, which was shown in the movie. I mean, kind of remarkable, isn't it? So we're asking you to think a little bit further into the future. And to get our creative juices going, I want to introduce our speaker, Brad Siegel. He is the founder and president of Puma, which is a market research firm out of Denver. But don't let that fool you. They work all over the world and all over the country. And Brad and his firm just won the President's Award from the International Downtown Association for his incredible trends analysis, which he'll be presenting to you. And with that, I wanted to introduce Brad and help welcome him. Thanks.
All right, thank you all for being here tonight. What I'd like to do over the next 20, 25 minutes is really give you some context that'll help you as you go through the evening and you help us gather your ideas, your thoughts, and your influence into this planning process. So what I'm going to present to you is a body of research that looks at different trends that are shaping cities all over the United States. It comes from our Global Trends Report. And we'll make this information available to you. We'll make the presentation available to you on the city website, Downtown Plan website. There's also supporting research that backs up all the different things we're talking about tonight. But this body of research was initially created back in 2006. We were in a similar position. Our firm, we're planners, we're real estate economists. And myself, I've been involved for about 30 years now, 30 years working on downtown development activities. Initially in downtown Denver, I ran a storefront development office in lower downtown about, 28 years ago. So we've been involved in downtown development for a long time. And in 2006, we were working in Denver on the downtown plan there. Our job as economists was to try to project forward 20 years. And what would downtown Denver become in 20 years? So in order to do this, we took an unconventional approach. We looked at different trends, 10 trends that are shaping cities all over the country, looked at what those impacts were, and then we extracted that back for Denver. And back in 2006, it influenced the downtown Denver plan. We got much more aggressive in terms of our projections for residential development. We foresaw some of the residential boom that's happening now based on the data back then. We also tempered our expectations for job growth. More importantly, we started to see that these trends were in place everywhere we worked. And as Cameron mentioned, we work all over the country. We've worked in 35 states and 150 cities. And virtually every city that we worked in, we saw these same trends in play. So we've since updated these trends. We've been working with the University of Colorado in Denver. I'm old enough now I can teach and get away with that. So we teach a class. We got our grad students involved, 22 grad students this time around. And the amount of data, the amount of information, very rich and very convincing in terms of where cities are going. So in terms of the trends, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but this has been evolving over the last almost 10 years that we've been doing it. About half of the trends I'm going to talk about tonight were the same trends that we researched 8-9 years ago. However, the world has changed dramatically. So we've included new trends as we've gone along with the exercise. And as I mentioned before, we'll make sure that the information is available to you via the city's website on the downtown plan. I'm going to talk for the next 15-20 minutes, I'm going to talk about these influences, and then I'm going to bring it back to Fort Collins in terms of what sort of opportunities are here locally. So the trends that we look at are different demographics that are changing cities. I'll talk about lifestyles, and then I'll talk about global competition. So on demographics, I don't know if you were prepared when you walked in the door, but there's a little bit of audience participation here. How many of us in the room will openly admit to being over 50? Okay, so we've heard a lot about those who are over 50 we're baby boomers. And we've heard a lot about boomers and our influence on America over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Our sheer numbers supported our economy for many years. We're the most highly educated group that had come heretofore. Also, we kind of think on the slide, I don't know if you can see the picture of the couple on the slide, but we sort of think that's how it all ends for us. You know, we're going to be happy, maybe on a beach somewhere. We are healthier than prior generations. Also, the boomers were the generation that was most heavily impacted by the recession. So the recession was a game changer for us. A lot of us lost home equity. Some of that's been recaptured. But more importantly, retirement incomes. What that means, a lot of us are aging in place where we thought maybe we would be moving to that beach. And that actually is an opportunity for a town like Fort Collins. 35 to 50. How many of you are 35 to 50? Okay. Gen X, slackers, right? Bitter to what the boomers tried to do for you guys. That was a lot of the early research on Gen X, but that's changed. That's changed a lot. Now a majority of you have families, you have kids. Importantly, this is where the discretionary income is in the economy coming out of the recession. Also, you are now moving into leadership positions. So as boomers start to retire, as we start to step aside, more and more you're seeing leadership in communities in that generation. Millennials, 20 to 35. Who's 20 to 35 in this room? Okay, great. You're our only hope, right? Now, I'll be honest with you. I got millennial kids. I got kids who are 22, 24. Sometimes I wonder. I start to scratch my head, and these guys are going to save the world? But they are. Trust me. There's a lot of reason why we should be really interested and that we should covet this age group and why we want this age group to stay in Fort Collins and to move to Fort Collins. So these guys growing up with technology, multitaskers. Unlike boomers, we inherited technology in the workplace. It just doesn't have the same affection for us. But millennials, from the crib, they're multitaskers. That multitasking ability now, that is the holy grail in the job market. So young, skilled workers are what every city in the country is competing for right now. It's a multicultural generation, big demographic shifts going on in cities all over the country. In the census between 2000 and 2010, we went from, of our 100 largest cities, we went from 43 to 58 that are now majority minority in terms of demographics, and it is because of these younger generations that are coming up. They're also passionate about community involvement. It's a generation that really wants to be involved meaningfully, in a meaningful way, to help change communities. And I heard that we had at least one Gen Z individual here. So in this latest trends report, we started talking about Gen Z. And this is the group that's coming after the millennials. They're now about 18, 19 at the oldest. What we're finding is they share a lot in common with the millennials, with that 20 to 35 age group. They are a little more cautious, a little more pragmatic. There's been more volatility in their upbringing. So 9/11, the 24-hour news cycle, school shootings, things like that are molding them, and their pragmatism may be a little different than the millennials. It's yet to be seen. But this generation, Gen Z, will bring upon the most profound demographic shift in the history of our country. By 2018, kids under 18 will be majority minority. And by 2042, there will be no ethnic majority in the United States. So let's move on. Other demographic trends we looked at. So education, talent, and jobs. I mentioned earlier, cities are coveting that 20 to 35 demographic. That's the highly skilled workforce. And if you want to be impressed about how important millennials are, the third bullet on that slide is probably the most important. Today, people 20 to 35 are 36% of the American workforce. By 2020, just 5 years from now, that age group will be 50% of the American workforce. So if Fort Collins wants to create jobs and create opportunity, that demographic is the one that we really need to attract. And again, we're competing with cities, not only in the Front Range, but we're competing with cities all over the country for that demographic. Another trend we've been tracking since the first time we did this almost 8 or 9 years ago is the growing influence of women, particularly in downtowns and in urban spaces. So women have been, and this won't surprise any of the women in the room, have been outperforming men, particularly in education for a long time. So coming out of bachelor degrees, master's degrees, almost 60% are being achieved by women. What that means, our next professional workforce, the workforce that we're most likely to see attracted to a downtown, will be increasingly female. Where we see a disconnect in all this is we don't necessarily see women in positions to influence the shape of cities. So there's a low percentage of women that are in political positions, that are planners, that are architects. Part of our message is that cities of the future really need to make sure they've got women in positions to influence the shape of the city itself. Another interesting thing on there that I'll mention just for a moment, that second bullet, when you have 22 research students working on a project like this, you just don't know what sort of pearls of wisdom you'll be gained out of this. But single boomer women over 50, are currently either outliving their husbands or otherwise shedding their husbands. And they're becoming an important force in the market, particularly home buying. So if anyone's in residential real estate, this is a demographic you're seeing more and more of. We feel it's actually a demographic that could be beneficial for downtowns as well moving forward. So let's talk about lifestyles. And I'm going to go through these trends. I'm going to bring it all together for you. So at this point, just wander with us. So changing consumer behaviors, the fourth trend we look at. The recession really was a game changer for how people buy things. So boomers, we spent like drunken sailors for decades, and impulse shopping was sort of our contribution to the history of the world. That's changed. And not only the recession, but also demographically, particularly the millennials, they are much more deliberate on how they spend money. Also, the whole sharing economy phenomenon. They don't necessarily have to own stuff the way that boomers did before them. This is, though, millennials and Gen X, this is where disposable income is most prevalent. If you've got, how many of you have a retail store in downtown Fort Collins? So there will be information in this body of work, I think, actually that would help you in your own merchandising. Because these demographics, this is where, again, where a lot of the disposable income is moving forward. The slide's kind of interesting. The image on the slide, the changes in downtowns, and particularly residential growth in and near downtowns, is also changing retail formats. So that's actually a Target store in Berkeley, California. And that Target store opened about 3 months ago in a former Walgreens. That's a 7,000 square foot Target. And it's essentially a fulfillment center for that downtown. So again, just these changing demographics, these patterns are really opening up some opportunities for downtowns as well. Fifth trend we looked at, shifts in transportation and mobility, and behaviors are really shifting away from cars. When we first did this 8-9 years ago, we thought that congestion would be a motive to have people come downtown, maybe live downtown. And that was a factor in big cities. A place like Fort Collins, congestion may be not such an issue. The bigger factor right now is demographics, and it goes back to that 20 to 35 age group. The third bullet on the slide again. People in their 20s, back in the 90s, accounted for 21% of all driving miles. Today, people in their 20s account for 14% of all driving miles. People in 20 to 35 age group, they want alternatives. So look at how progressive Fort Collins was with the Max line, you know, to have an option. Bikes, walking, different ways to get around are more and more important. And again, if we're going to attract this group, this 20 to 35 group for our economy, the transportation elements start to become pretty important on that. Second to last bullet, bike share. You probably see these bike share programs popping up all over the place. Bike share is the fastest growing mode of transport ever on the history of the planet. So when we did this last year, there were 500 cities around the world that had bike share. Today, there's almost 650 cities around the world that have bike share. So these trends are not just the United States, they're also worldwide. Health and wellness, another trend that we see shaping cities. When we started doing this 8-9 years ago, we were concerned about a shortage of healthcare professionals, primarily because of aging boomers. We were creating more demand on the healthcare system, but we're only educating the same number of doctors that we have for the last 20, 25 years. This was before insurance reform, so now we have more demand for all of that. So part of the message here is if we're going to be a viable community, a viable downtown, do we have access to healthcare in a variety of forms? And then new within the last couple of years are healthy food movements. So moving toward health, both millennials and boomers sharing a new emphasis on health. Millennials are just wired this way. They have more healthy lifestyles. Boomers, we now suddenly realize we want to live longer. So health has become more of a consideration for us. So are there opportunities? And a town like Fort Collins that has such a great agricultural heritage and all this wonderful stuff around the city, can we really capitalize on that, showcase that in downtown? Regionalism. This trend, initially when we did this, we were focused on the debt, and this goes back again pre-recession. Pre-recession, everyone in this room, everyone in your family accounted for about $29,000 of the US federal debt. Last week when I checked the, in fact, if you want to get depressed when you wake up in the morning, just Google US national debt, and you'll get a clock that actually ticks to the dollar. So last week, everyone in the room, everyone in your family represented $56,500 in change in terms of national debt. What that means is forget the politics in Washington. Washington's just broke. The federal government is broke. So in terms of investing in infrastructure, in innovation, in education, it's going to be up to regions to do that. So how does Fort Collins join with its neighbors to start really investing in the things that are important to make this community competitive moving forward? The last set of trends I'll talk about, and then we'll bring it home to Fort Collins, global competition. This slide has always fascinated me. These are the world's 3 largest economies over 200 years. So if you go back to 1850, China, India, the United Kingdom were the 3 largest economies in the world. This year, the United States, China rose above Japan just about 5 years ago. And then talk about back to the future. 2050, it's China and India again, and the United States. So what's happening is an incredible shift in global wealth. This was accelerated by the recession. So emerging economies, China, Brazil, India, all these places, are consuming resources at a massive scale. To give you an example of that, the second bullet up there, China's share of global car sales. Back in 2000, China accounted for less than 1% of global car sales. The last year the data is available, 2013, 24% of the planet's car sales were in China. Comparable figures for the United States, we were 34% back in 2000. We were 18%. So our message here is that resource depletion is going to continue. I mean, we may think, oh, petroleum prices are cheap now. That is a temporary phenomenon. So whether it's petroleum or concrete or steel, all these commodities that go into growth, they're going to be increasingly expensive over time. We feel that makes an argument to reinvest in existing infrastructure, that downtowns, urban environments are going to be more competitive economically over time. Technology. What's new in technology? Actually, the device that's changed our urban form most over the last 7 or 8 years are these mobile devices we carry around with us. Hard to believe that when we did our first trends report back in 2007, that's when the iPhone was introduced. There was no iPhone before that. This year, there will be more mobile connections on the planet than there are people. There will be 7.4 billion mobile connections. We're doing a better job getting cell phones in people's hands than we are feeding them around the world, which is a fact. It's changing the economy, and we're seeing that a couple things. One, we're more entrepreneurial. So a community that can really foster entrepreneurship and innovation, that's where the advantage is going to be. Also, the nature of space is changing, the nature of office space, residential space. And you'll see a new development that the personal space is getting smaller, the common social space is getting bigger. Part of that is millennial preferences. Part of it, though, is how technology is changing, how we use space and how we communicate with each other. Lastly, the last trend we look at is sustainability. And there are three pieces of this. There's environmental, economic, and social equity in terms of sustainability. Over the last 8 or 9 years, as we've delivered this message in different communities, people sort of get economic and environment. They understand there needs to be some balance there. What we're seeing in communities all over the country, though, is rising activism and a need to address social equity. The notion of, do we provide affordable housing, and do we do something about that as a community? Wage mobility, do we care about that? And those, again, me, I got a millennial kid. My kid who's 24 is a teacher, having real trouble thinking about moving back home to Denver just because of the cost of living. So this is going to start to affect communities, and if we're going to continue to attract that young, skilled workforce that we want, social equity issues play a role in that moving forward. So, conclusions, and then I'm going to wrap up with some things for you to think about as you work the room later tonight. All that research, those 10 trends, there's about 150 sources behind it. It boils down to 5 key conclusions for downtowns. And these trends are converging in a way that are very favorable for vibrant downtowns. Now, vibrant is in there for a reason. Not every downtown is going to take advantage of this because there needs to be some sense of vitality going on. But number one, the demographics very much in the favor of downtowns. So the population is getting both older and younger at the same time. And both the boomers and both the millennials are very predisposed to downtowns and urban environments. Secondly, increasingly connected and competitive world. That's how technology is changing. If we can be a hotbed for innovation and entrepreneurship in Fort Collins, that's where job growth will continue to be in the future. Resource-intensive lifestyle is not sustainable. That's all that consumption going on the other side of the globe that's going to affect commodity prices here. What it translates into is a premium and an economic advantage on downtown, on infrastructure that already exists. Fourth, innovation and investment more reliant on regional initiative. I mentioned earlier, dysfunctional federal government, so it's more and more up to regions, Fort Collins and your neighbors, to invest in innovation, infrastructure, some of the things that we've counted on from the feds in the past. And then lastly, planning for economic diversity. You know, is this important? Is this an important value for the community? Should we care about affordable housing and some of these other issues moving forward? So I've got a few things for you guys to think about, opportunities for Fort Collins, and part of this information is from a market assessment that we have just completed a draft of. So as part of this whole downtown plan, there's a body of market information that's going to try to provide reality so that we can balance our vision with what is tangible in terms of downtown Fort Collins. So demographics, a lot of the market information very favorable for this downtown. So we are already doing a good job in terms of the 20 to 35. Now some of it has to do with CSU being here. And CSU is that pipeline of talent, if you will. So can we capture that and can we connect more strongly to that to really feed into downtown and strengthen our economy? Also boomers, don't forget about us. This is an attractive retirement destination and we can be entrepreneurial and do cool stuff too. Yes, we can. Okay. Lifestyles. You already have an amazing lifestyle in Fort Collins. In fact, we want to make sure that we balance growth with protection of that lifestyle moving forward. That's a big issue for every city up and down the Front Range right now. But you're bikeable. Interesting, did you know you are the safest driving city in the United States as measured by Allstate? Not that I know anything about drivers up here, but that sort of blew me away. That should bode well for cyclists, right? You're right. But you do have this great quality of life. The Max line is going to end up being an extraordinary investment for the future of this town simply because of the demographics and how the world is changing around us. And then your retail mix downtown. Great mix of authentic, independent retail. Continuing to nurture local independence moving forward will be key. Global competition. You know, that great source of knowledge, nerdwallet.com, actually ranks you as number 6 in America's most innovative tech hubs. Well, and again, you get that pipeline. CSU produces 30% of the state's STEM degrees. Those are science, technology, engineering, math. That's actually more than any other university. So not only have you got a leg up on that football team down in Boulder, but you actually beat them in this category too. Huge advantage. Maybe this one's a little more important, but you know, you can talk to me out afterwards if you want to debate that. So can we nurture entrepreneurs with flexible office, light industrial? How many of you are property owners downtown, commercial property owners? Okay, this is a tough group. You know, they don't negotiate 5-year leases and they don't look at some of the conventions. But can we get innovative in terms of lease structure to really nurture this segment of the economy moving forward? And you do have very low vacancy rates, so in the short term there's going to be increasing pressure on rents, which threatens really both retail and your business mix as well. We'll be talking about that with you more tonight. Other considerations as you work the room tonight: housing affordability. Where is that as a value? Do we care? Do we want to do anything as a community to help promote that? Amenities for living. More and more people are going to be drawn to downtown to live. So do we have those basic amenities that are needed for daily life? Do we have the corner grocery? Do we have the dog park? Do we have some of these other things that people look for? Multicultural community. Increasingly the world again is getting more and more diverse. So are there different segments of the community that we could celebrate more aggressively and embrace in downtown? Parking management. I'm sure the topic we worked on your downtown plan in 2004. We were talking about parking. So still something to talk about. Could we be more proactive about managing parking to really support the economy and some of these trends that we see? Fresh food, and is there an ag niche? And then lastly, I mentioned all these facts and figures in terms of the market assessment. We've got a draft. We'll hope to finalize that over the next month or so, and then work to distribute that to folks who are interested. But on housing, there's huge opportunities, but the world is going to more multifamily and smaller units. So as you think tonight, you think, where do we put that stuff? You know, if that's where the market is, where's an appropriate place for those types of units in Fort Collins? Office, do we have the office space? Do we want the space for not only creatives and startups, but this town is interesting. It's sort of a tale of two markets. You've got a lot of demand on the creative side, and then there's demand in the larger 10,000 square foot and above side. So as these companies grow, oftentimes they have no place to move within downtown. Retail, this is fascinating. This comes from a study the city did here about 5 years ago. There's a perception here that downtown is just about restaurants. Well, restaurants occupy 30% of the space. That's aggressive, but that's certainly not every storefront. Restaurants do generate 50%, half your sales tax. But conventional retail occupies 60% of the space here. So there's a lot of opportunity to keep that. That's a very healthy mix, to keep that healthy mix moving forward. On the visitor market, boutique hotel, maybe. We don't see a large, robust market for hotels here. The market is saturated to a degree, but there is opportunity for niche properties in downtown that can really take advantage of this experience. And then lastly, one of the greatest things you have here is this industrial area to the north of downtown. And how do we retain some of the essential elements of that area and leave it as a place where we can actually make stuff? Imagine a city in America where you can actually make stuff. You've got that opportunity here in downtown Fort Collins. So my last thought, and then we've got to switch the microphone and all that good stuff with Cameron, but my last thought to you is when you're thinking about the future of Fort Collins tonight, this is really an unusual time, and particularly for those of you who are under 40 in the room, you need to understand downtowns were not always the beneficiaries of any sort of market trend whatsoever. I mentioned earlier I've been doing this 30 years. In the first 20-some years of my life, we've really been pushing uphill to try to attract investment downtown. Now is very different. The winds are in our sails. There's lots of opportunity. And I think our challenge tonight, our challenge in the plan is how do we take this period of opportunity and really shape a downtown where we haven't had an opportunity to shape ever before, but how do we shape this in a way that will benefit not only us, but also benefit our kids and generations to come. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Cameron.
Okay, over the next 20 minutes, we're going to go through a fun little exercise. We'll be asking some questions of you, and it's not really meant to be too involved. Just use your gut level reaction. Just gives us some insight on what your preferences are. You can be assured that we're going to be digging a lot deeper into all these issues as we go further into the project and start vetting the different ideas. You'll also notice that not all the issues are covered. There are some that frankly just don't lend themselves very well to a survey of this type. So a good example might be parking. So you're going to be shown, we're going to go through some introductory slides, some demographic slides, and then you're going to be shown 9 images per slide. And you're going to pick the top 3. Now, you might look at these images on the screen and say you like all the visual images. Still pick the top 3. Which of these commercial buildings provide the most appropriate character in downtown? Okay, we have L and E. I'm sorry. Which housing types would be most appropriate? So it looks like the brownstone units and the stacked units, followed by the loft units. So on this one, we have a mixed use on the site. So what's the best way to provide joint living and working opportunities downtown? This would be a mixed use type of a building. Okay, apartments over store, followed by loft with the workshop. Okay, which gateway features are appropriate in downtown? We have several areas where you feel like you're arriving into the downtown. Lighting combined with the banners and the planters. Okay, which sidewalk design provides the best downtown pedestrian experience? Okay, the sidewalk with planters and outdoor some outdoor seating. Okay, which bikeways are most appropriate for downtown? Okay, so B, C, D, and E, these are the protected lanes and buffered lanes primarily. Okay, which types of bike parking would you like to see more of in downtown? Okay, so the on-street bike racks, followed by some of the larger racks, okay? Okay, this is a fun one. It's not visual. Okay, which is the most important when choosing where to park downtown? Again, now in this one, and I should have said this, pick your top two. Okay, that's very helpful. We've really struggled with crafting these questions, trying to understand what people's preferences are and what they valued. This is very helpful. So proximity, and then finding a space quickly. What would improve your parking experience downtown? Again, your top two. I think we're going to continue this dialogue over the next several months. And what we're trying to get at with these questions is what people's preferences are as far as their behavior. Now, there are a lot of potential solutions to the parking problem, and there are costs associated with all those solutions. But we don't want to jump too quickly to solutions, but instead try to get a better sense of what people really care about with that parking experience. Okay, so increased availability of on-street parking, followed by real-time parking availability information, and then parking garages. So a wide variety, obviously, of strategies to improve your experience with parking. What types of wayfinding are most important in the downtown area? So we have, the first one is just a smartphone application, if you can't see that. If you could select your top three. Okay. So a map with pedestrian information and photos, followed by the smartphone. And avoiding sign clutter, so interesting competition there. Okay, what public art would you like to see in the downtown area? And we try to be all-inclusive here, both performing and visual arts. Okay, sculptures, followed by street musicians, with a real wide range here. What outdoor venues are most appropriate? Okay, so an urban venue followed by a smaller venue in a plaza. But really quite a broad range than support. Okay, what gathering spaces are appropriate for downtown? Okay, so we have the pedestrian street, followed by the open air market, and then several that are actually very close. Which improvements are most appropriate for incorporating more nature into the downtown area? Okay, street tree canopies followed by pocket parks and community gardens. which stormwater management approaches are most appropriate? Okay, rain gardens being number one, followed by another rain garden and a swale type planting, very similar. Okay, which solar power applications are most appropriate? Okay, rooftop units, followed by solar on institutional buildings, and then you have, looks like, roof-mounted units being the priority. That concludes the polling, which is kind of fun. So thank you very much.